So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. I've heard about Laval for many years, but I've never had a chance to visit your excellent university and see your beautiful campus, so I'm very pleased to be here. I'm sorry that I can't give the paper in French. I speak a little Japanese and a little Spanish, but no French. We don't have much chance to use it out in the West. Finally, before I start, I just want to mention that this little paper on the Buddhist concept of death and what happens afterward is from an inside point of view. My wife and I have been Zen Buddhists for the entire length of our marriage, which will be 54 years this summer. So I'm speaking to you as an insider and as a Zen Buddhist. Now, as you probably are aware, there is variation in among Buddhists on many issues. So what I'm saying may not represent exactly what other Buddhists would say, but I think by and large what I'm going to talk about would be agreed upon by most Buddhists. Okay, well, let's start with Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. He taught the doctrine of Anatta, which means no eternal soul or individual self. No eternal soul or individual self. But Buddha really urged his followers not to speculate about this kind of metaphysical issue too much. Rather, it's more important to concentrate on the here and now. In fact, Buddha, who lived until 80 years old, he died of food poisoning when he was 80, only mentioned God once in his long career of teaching. He made mention, a very short sentence, he said, "There is an unborn, undying, unchanging." That's all he had to say about it. When people would ask him about what is the meaning of life or what is the meaning of God, he would simply do something like pick a flower and hold it up, not say a thing. So that's a very Zen-like very Zen-like action. The denomination to which my wife and I belong is Soto Zen. It's an American North American affiliate. Soto Zen was founded in Japan by Eihei Dogen, and he was kind of like the Buddha. He said, well, regardless of what actually happens at death or thereafter, it's probably better to act as if you don't believe in rebirth. Now, why would that be? He said, well, the goal of Buddhism is to help us become detached. And as long as you are seeking for fame or fortune or immortality, you will never find the radical freedom that Buddhism offers. To the extent that the concept of rebirth hinders the process of detachment by encouraging you to seek after immortality, then it's not fruitful. Now, despite these disclaimers, Buddhists, all Buddhists, I think, do believe that something survives death. It may not be the self as we normally define it, but what is this that survives death? There are three aspects: consciousness, karmic tendencies, and unconscious memories. Now, maybe I can give you an analogy of how this happens. An analogy that is sometimes used is a light bulb that burns out. You unscrew it and you discard it. you screw in a new light bulb, and it lights up again. So they're different light bulbs, but they're both lighted by the same sort of energy, or elan vital. And so I think this is a pretty good analogy. Now, Buddhists do recognize that the self is necessary for us to get through life. So sometimes it is said that Buddhists believe that the self is an illusion. That's not true. The illusion is that when people believe that the self is independent, or that the self is eternal, that's the illusion. And so we have to be very clear about that. The analogy of that I like is, if you look at a wave on the ocean, it appears to have individual reality, but as a matter of fact, it's just an extension of the ocean underneath, and it eventually falls back into the ocean. So it appears to be individual and have individual characteristics, but actually it is part of what the Buddhists would call the self, as part of the underlying Buddha nature, which provides the ontological basis of all being, of all reality. Now, what happens when we die? Well, after we die, we enter a stage that's called Bardo by the Tibetan Buddhists. Zen Buddhists don't talk too much about this, but this is a period where, first of all, the individual who has just died is involved in an evaluation of his or her life. And after this evaluation, and it becomes clear whether one's bad karma outweighs the good karma, or vice versa, one visits a number of different places, including hot hells and cold hells. Maybe you've never heard of a cold hell before, but in Buddhism, and at least in Tibetan Buddhism, they exist. And or the realm of the hungry ghosts, or the realm of the Pure Land. If your good karma exceeds your bad karma, you may go to the Pure Land, which is kind of like the Christian heaven. But now it's important to emphasize that all of these experiences these places probably don't exist literally. They are mental states. But for the person experiencing them, they seem real. And so if you go to one of the hells, it can be a pretty terrifying place, whereas if you go to the Pure Land, it can be a pretty wonderful place. Now, the Zen Buddhists don't talk about these places, any of the places I mentioned, very much. For Zen Buddhists, they focus on rebirth again in this world, or maybe some other planet, as an animal or a human being. The reason they don't talk about the other things is because nobody comes back from the Pure Land to talk about it, because from the Pure Land, the next step is union with the cosmic Buddha, with the eternal. So you never come back as a human being. You're guaranteed to final graduation. And I've never met anyone who has come back from hell to talk about that. And I've never talked to any Zen Buddhists who know anything about that either. And so if you don't have any direct experience to talk about, then we kind of ignore it in Zen Buddhism. But there are lots of people who remember their previous lives as animals or humans. And so there's some data to work with there. And so that's what in Zen Buddhism we talk about. The founder of our order, North American order, remembers about 13 previous lives. The first one as a white tiger and thereafter she alternated between being a Buddhist monk and a Catholic monk. And so she writes about this in some of her writings. So if you come back as a human, that's actually you have the best chance of getting rid of bad karma. And this may take repeated tries in more than one lifetime, but eventually when you get rid of bad karma, then you can join the eternal. You can join the cosmic Buddha. At which point you cease to exist. So that's why there's no eternal soul and no independent self. The goal is at the final stage is assimilation with the cosmic Buddha. Now, is there any evidence for these beliefs in Buddhism? Well, I just mentioned the memories of past lives. There are also memories that it's not uncommon for young children to have memories of that Bardo period before birth, where they participated in deciding what family to be born into, what kind of family would offer the best chance of dealing with their karmic tendencies. They lose these memories quite early. So after about the age of 3, they don't remember these things anymore. There are near-death experiences, and you've probably read some of those accounts of near-death experiences. There's also some scientific evidence. Scientists at the University of Southampton examined more than 2,000 people who suffered cardiac arrest in the US, the UK, and Austria, and were then the hearts were restarted and they were brought back to life. Now, the brain typically shuts down within 20 to 30 seconds after the heart has stopped. But they found that about 40% of the people who came back after their heart was stopped had memories of what happened in the room, what people were saying and doing for up to 3 minutes after brain death. And so we know that consciousness does survive brain death. In conclusion, what do we learn from this? Well, first of all, that consciousness has some independence from the brain. I think as a medical anthropologist, I have done some studies of the placebo effect. And the placebo effect is based on the premise that the brain can create its own chemicals. It also can utilize chemicals from the immune system and the hormonal system. And with all those resources, the body is capable of healing a great variety of illnesses itself. But the mind has to convince the brain that it can do it. And sometimes it uses tricks to do this. Just one example, and then I'll quit. I know I'm running a little bit over time. Example, the individual whose arms were paralyzed. So he was put in front of a mirror, and somebody stood behind him and put their arms out in front and moved them around. And this tricked the brain into thinking that the body could use its arms. And feelings started to come back to these paralyzed arms, and after a while, the person was able to move his arms. So there's a lot of research being done today on the placebo effect. But this finding that consciousness has some independence from the brain is a very radical thing. It's a very interesting thing. In fact, in Buddhism, consciousness precedes matter. Our concept of God is not a normal deity, but it's pure consciousness, pure potentiality, which is constantly manifested in the material world of many universes. And those universes decay and they go back to consciousness. So consciousness is the basis of the universe itself. Now, what's my position on all of this? There is a very basic teaching in Zen Buddhism that you don't have to believe anything that the theologians tell you unless you have experienced it yourself. Which is pretty good advice, I think. I have no memory of past lives, and I haven't had any near-death experiences. So that leaves me, I'm agnostic about all of this. Even though I am a dedicated Zen Buddhist. But I think there is enough evidence to support the fact that something survives death, that I think we should keep an open mind, and that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm also trying to work hard to get rid of my unfortunate karmic consequences before I die. Thank you.